On some level, Donald Trump is not happy about the fact that so much attention is going towards his legal troubles. But I actually think one of the side effects of that is that people are not paying as much attention to another thing that was really driving a lot of media attention about Donald Trump earlier this year, and that was the state of his brain. One of the big parts of this election has been trying to figure out which of the candidates, if any, have it together mentally. And there was a lot of analysis going on a daily basis of Donald Trump's seeming stumbles and gaffes in speeches. You don't hear as much of that now because people are focused on what's going on in New York. But we wanted to touch base with some of the scientists doing experimental work, doing some studies, trying to figure out exactly what's going on with the candidates. And to that end, we're very lucky to be joined on the program by Dr. Vince Greenwood, psychologist and director for the Washington Center for Cognitive Therapy. Dr. Greenwood, welcome to the Damage Report.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Very glad to have you here. I know that you actually just released sort of the results of a study that you did into some of the signs of like verbal decline. Can you walk us through how you came to start the study and what you were looking to accomplish with it?
Yeah, so you summarized it well. There has been increasing conversation and concern that focused on Donald Trump's brain health. As we know, there's been significant commentary on President Biden's brain health over the last couple of years, but more recently, some mental health professionals, some clinical neurologists have been kind of looking at Trump's, particularly his speeches, his verbal behavior, and noticing the quality of it, and that some of his verbal struggles are not just, occasional gaffes. They're not just simply a product of aging, but they're qualitative markers of something that might be much more serious, an underlying degenerative neurological disease. And so that conversation was heating up over the winter and spring, and I know it's been dominated by the court cases recently. But I jumped into the conversation in the spring. What I did was I took these observations by various mental health professionals about these particular verbal slip-ups and developed a checklist. The checklist has about 7 items. These are 7 specific verbal behaviors that are not just gaffes, but might indicate something more serious. And then I took that checklist. I also developed a checklist of signs of aging that express themselves in speech. And I took that checklist. That checklist has things like, mostly things like, does one project their voice as strong as when they were younger? Do they speak as fast? And then I took those checklists and tried to inject a little more objectivity, a little more scientific rigor into the issue of does Trump or Biden suffer from a possible neurological? And I went over speeches and interviews that both Trump and Biden gave when they were middle-aged men, mostly in the 1980s, 1990s, very easy to track down on YouTube because of their stature. And then with the checklist in hand, just kind of noted to what degree they displayed either these markers of possible neurological decline or these markers of aging, and then compared that with recent speech, over the last year or two. And the findings were kind of striking and lopsided.
Hey, I'm glad you're here. Listen, in order for the Damage Report to keep on going, we need viewers like you to become a member on YouTube. Can you click the join button on YouTube today? Thank you. Yeah, that was the part that I found most fascinating about this, that went beyond previously when I've seen psychologists and neurologists talk about either Biden or about Trump. It felt like it was a lot of things all lumped together as, do they have an issue or don't they? And having it separated into things that could plausibly be linked to some sort of actual neurological problem and things that just most of us can expect will happen to our speech as we age. I found that to be very helpful because you'll often have people on one side or the other say, well, Biden's lost a step or Trump has lost a step, and they don't want to give an inch that maybe both of them have. And then maybe they're missing the fact that maybe both of them have, but that it's not the same thing. Like, people do tend to speak differently as they get old, but it doesn't have to mean that there's some sort of neurological issue. But I want to go to sort of the results. You compiled these checklists, and we might have a graphic of one of them actually. I'm not sure if we have that, we can bring it up. You can see how sort of the checklist and how you scored it. So talk to me about the results in these areas.
Yeah, it would be nice if we had that graphic. Otherwise, I can describe them. So I just went over, kind of randomly picked interviews of Biden and Trump when they were middle-aged men with the checklist in hand, and the results got pretty lopsided. As you would expect, neither one of them had any significant aging characteristics when they were middle-aged men, but neither did either one of them have these specific verbal markers of possible neurological decline. Biden, as we know, does have a diagnosed stuttering problem, but that doesn't reflect any serious underlying neurological problem. And basically, they were both clean as middle-aged men. Now, in their more recent speeches, when we applied the checklist to a number of recent interviews and speeches, Trump, and on all these markers, there are 7 different markers on the checklist of verbal signs that might suggest cognitive decline. Trump was having these things significantly more than he was as a middle-aged man. They were, if one of these things just happened once in a blue moon, it would be no big deal. But they're happening recurringly. Let me just give you one example. The technical term for it is semantic paraphasia, and that refers to when the speaker substitutes a totally unintended word for another word. And they might say telephone instead of television. Again, if it happened once in a blue moon, we can all make that kind of mistake. Trump, it's happening much more regularly. There's a clip that's easily Googled where he's talking about the Mueller investigation, and he's trying to say the word origins of the investigation. Mm-hmm. He tries a number of times. He's clearly aware that he's not saying it correctly, and the word he's saying is oranges. It keeps coming out oranges, and he's not able to correct himself. He finally says the beginnings of it. And that's a semantic paraphasia. That's not trivial. That's the kind of thing that we see when someone is starting to enter a possible early dementia stage. Can't diagnose it just on that one thing, but that's a good example that really gets your attention. Biden is not displaying any of these verbal markers. Occasionally, there'll be word finding difficulties with Biden, occasionally filler speech, but he scores much more highly on all the indicators of aging. His voice is clearly less strong than it was as a middle-aged man. It doesn't project as well. He has a hoarseness in his voice. Trump did not score very high on the markers of aging. His voice remains strong, and he kind of blusters ahead in his speech without any noticeable aging markers. So from that, I think we feel like we're on a little more firmer scientific ground in saying that the verbal slip-ups that we're seeing in Trump might be a little more ominous than Biden. Biden just doesn't speak as fluently and certainly as strongly as he did as a younger man, but we don't see these diagnostic type verbal slip-ups.
It's very interesting that those two things, like even once you've separated the two different groups, that they wouldn't necessarily move in the same direction or at the same rate, that you could maintain some of these, like the ability to speak at the same sort of pace or at the same volume while exhibiting possible signs of neurological decay, whereas another person's brain could theoretically be maintaining kind of its rough level of health, but overall they are aging in the way that we might expect. I find that to be very fascinating. When you click the join button and become a tier 2 member, you get access to all of our weekly top 10 lists. What are you waiting for?